Good morning, everyone. So I've got some dough that's been cold proofed. It sat in the fridge overnight in a Banneton. I have my two Dutch ovens in the oven. They've been preheating for about 45 minutes. So they're on the middle rack in my oven, side by side. And underneath them, I have a tray of water, which I use just to try and keep the bottom of the bread nice and soft. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this dough that I cold proofed yesterday. I'm going to flip it out on a parchment paper, get it scored and ready, get it into the oven and start to bake it, just so that you can see that process. So for beginners, we recommend that you start with a beginner bread recipe, which is a 1-day recipe. And we always say that cold proofing is optional. And we often recommend that beginners don't do cold proofing until they've mastered the essential processes. So the essential processes are having an active starter, fed and at or after peak and ready to go, mixing up your dough in the morning, stretching and folding it 3 or 4 times, allowing it to bulk proof on the container and clear, or on the counter, sorry, in clear straight-sided containers so you can see how much it's grown, dumping it out, pre-shaping it, shaping it, scoring it, and baking it. If you practice those techniques right from the get-go, then you're going to master the essential processes. What we say with cold proofing is that if you mess something up in the bulk proofing stage or some other stage, then cold proofing is probably just going to make the issue worse. But of course, I'm a little bit more experienced, so I mixed this dough up yesterday, let it bulk proof in containers, and then pre-shaped it and shaped it and got it into these Bannetons. So these are just basic silicone Bannetons that I got off of Amazon. In the description of this video, I've pasted all the links you need. I've pasted our ebook about what the essential processes are, what the advanced processes are, and how to get them mastered. We really recommend that for beginners. I've posted the beginner bread recipe. If you don't have a starter yet, I've posted a full day-by-day video tutorial to make a starter. And then at the bottom of the description, there's a whole list of all the stuff that I've purchased off of Amazon over my time of making sourdough. And all of my Amazon stuff is like focused on what's being most cost effective. So these silicone Bannetons, which I will just show you, were a 2-pack, and they were cheap. They were like, I don't know, 13 or 14 bucks. So if you watched my live yesterday, I mixed the higher hydration beginner bread recipe with a little bit of oat flour and lots of all-purpose flour. I let them bulk proof all day. I came home later in the day, got them pre-shaped and shaped, and then got them into the Bannetons like this. So the Bannetons are just kind of well floured. And then for the round one, I just used like a shower cap to cover it. And for the oval one, I've just got like a grocery store bread bag. So I covered these, put them in the fridge overnight, and now it's morning. So like I said, my Dutch ovens are preheated. My oven only goes to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. So I cook my bread at 450 the whole time. I keep a tray of water on the rack underneath the Dutch ovens just to keep the bottom of the dough soft. And I put a layer of crinkled up tinfoil in the bottom of my Dutch oven, and then I use parchment paper as a sling to lift the bread into the Dutch ovens. I get that lid on. I set a timer for 30 minutes. I let the bread bake for 30 minutes. Then I take the lid off. I set another timer for 15 or 20 minutes. At that point, I'll take the tray of water out just to let the bottom of the bread finish cooking, and I'll use my thermometer to keep checking the bread until it's at 205 degrees Fahrenheit on the inside, and it comes out perfect almost every time. So what I'm going to do with these two breads is I'm going to get them onto the parchment paper and get them scored, and then I'm going to pull my two Dutch ovens out, get the bread into the Dutch oven, and go. Lots of people here. Thanks for being here. If you've got any questions, post them. I can see them sort of coming by in the comments, and I'm happy to answer them. So I just have some basic, inexpensive, regular all-purpose flour from Walmart. You can use any flour you like to prep your bread, but I'm just going to spread some flour onto my parchment paper just to keep the bread from sticking. And now I'm going to take my batard, my oval loaf, and I'm going to tip it out onto the parchment paper. So I kind of just like to support it with my hand until it starts to go. And then I will get it onto the parchment paper. And I did flour these silicone bannetons before I put the bread in. So there's a little bit of flour in there. And these bannetons are nice because they give the bread sort of like cool looking lines on them. I'll see if I can lift this up and show it to you. So here it is. So this dough was, perfectly bulk proofed. All of the essential processes were followed. This is your best case scenario that you get to after practicing lots. So now I'm just going to take, a good amount of all-purpose flour and put it on top of my bread. So this isn't a necessary step, but this will make it so that when your bread scores, when your score pops, you can see the artwork that you've done on your bread. So you've got two kinds of scores. You have a functional score and a decorational score. The purpose of a functional score is to assist with oven spring with your dough. So you're going to put a score that is, the length of the bread. It's about a half an inch deep. It's on a 45-degree angle to the bread, so usually it ends up being fairly close to parallel to the counter. And what it's going to do is as the bread is inside the oven, steam builds up inside of it and starts to cook it from the inside out. And eventually the steam bursts out through this score that you've created, and that's what creates that big, tall loaf that you have. If your loaf isn't bulk proofed effectively, then nothing you do is going to make the spring happen. It's almost always not the score that causes the issue. It's almost always the bulk proofing. So if you're a beginner, for sure, go check out the description of this video and you'll find our beginner bread recipe, our essentials ebook, and then our bulk proofing success video. Master those things, and then this part will be easier. You can put a decorative score on just to make your bread look nice. That's fun. I mean, sourdough's supposed to be fun. That's the whole point. But the functional score is going to be the most important score. A trick that you can do is, Vladia just sent me stars. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. One trick that you can use if you're thinking that your bread might be a little overproofed, and the way you know that is because when you went to pre-shape it, it was very sticky. When you took it out of your banneton, it fell. So I'm not sure if you can notice, but while I'm standing here talking, I don't have to rush because this is perfectly proofed bread. It's not spreading or falling. It's holding its shape. So when you get your bread out of your proofing container or shaped, or when you get it out of your banneton, thank you. Thanks, Ladia. It should hold its shape. If it's not holding its shape, then it's probably overproofed, right? And if it's overproofed, then you should still bake it. But a trick that you can use is the hot score. So some people call it the 7-minute score. You'll see it for sure now that I've said it, if you haven't already seen it. But what you can do is somewhere between 7 and 12 minutes into baking your bread, you can pull your bread out. And if it looks like your score is starting to fuse, starting to go shiny and smooth, you can just take your razor and cut that score again. And sometimes it'll encourage that steam to escape. So just little tricks. If your bread is overproofed, 2 tricks that might help you are really good pre-shaping. And the pre-shaping video is in the description of this video, and a hot score. So I'm just going to take my boule now with my round dough, and you can see that when I shaped it yesterday, so I pre-shaped it, I let it sit for 30 minutes, and then I put the final shape on it. I got it into the banneton, and then I did what's called stitching it up. So so you've shaped it, and you flip it into your banneton upside down so that the top's on the bottom of the banneton, and then what you can do is just let it sit for a minute and then start like pulling the dough over itself to stitch it like this. It just holds more tension that way. So let's flip this one out. And I just like to be gentle and try and coax it as much as I can. So there we go. So there's our banneton from yesterday. Lots of good flour in there. I like these silicone bannetons. I just got them this week. I wasn't really sure if they were going to be great, but there's no fabric inside to have to clean, and they're super flexible, so you can kind of wiggle the bread out of them. But not only that, if you've been following me for a while, you know that I have an apartment-size oven and a very small kitchen. I live in a little cottage on the lake in Ontario, Canada, and these actually fold flat, kind of. of course, it's full of flour and I'm making a mess, but I can get these to fold right down flat and they slide into the bottom of my oven. So space savers, and they were a really good price. So now I've got my batard and my bowl out, right? So I'm going to cook both at the same time. I'm using two slightly bigger 4.1 or 4.3 quart Dutch ovens, and the reason I use those is because the oval shape makes it so that I can fit two side by side in my oven. The Amazon list at the bottom of the description of this video has a whole bunch of links. I love cast iron Dutch ovens. I really like the way they cook the bread, but ultimately the ones I use the most are these enamel oval ones because I'm almost always baking 2 loaves of bread at the same time. So I've just taken a bunch of all-purpose flour, I've coated the top of the bread, and now I'm just going to give them a quick score. So this part's going to go a little bit quick. So I'm going to score the bread, and then I'm going to pull the 2 Dutch ovens out, get them here, get the tinfoil into the bottom of the Dutch oven, sling the bread in, get the lids on, and get them back in the oven. And then if anyone's got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them and keep educating. So if you've never seen me before, my name is Sarah. I started Sourdough for Beginners. It's a huge group on Facebook. I originally had started the group to be able to help my friends learn, and the thing went crazy. I think we're at 450,000 members now. And so as time went on, more and more questions came up in the group, and I started, making videos and writing tutorials and everything else, and it's just sort of evolved on its own since then. So if you're watching, you can see my bread is holding its shape. That's a really good sign that you've mastered the essential processes. And if you've mastered the essential processes using the beginner bread recipe, then your next step is to go up to the higher hydration recipe to start giving yourself even more oven spring and even more of a fluffy bread. Is it really essential to put the tinfoil at the bottom of your Dutch oven? No, not at all. Not at all. These are just tricks that I use. So, my oven is very hot on the bottom, and it's like, I don't know if you can see it, but it doesn't touch the wall. What happened was we did a renovation during COVID and couldn't get any appliances, so I'm stuck with like a broken old fridge and this tiny, terrible apartment-sized Dutch oven trying to be a sourdough expert. It's insane. So people often bake their bread and then complain that when they're cutting their bread, they just can't get through the bottom because it gets too hard on the bottom. So the tinfoil underneath the parchment paper in the Dutch oven and the tray of water under the Dutch oven for all but the last 10 minutes of baking are just to try and keep the bottom of your bread softer. So first on this bread, I'm going to give it a functional score, and then I'm just going to put some nice little decorations on. And maybe I'll start with the round loaf first. So with the round loaf, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the top of the bread, and I'm going to slice all the way down to the bottom of the bread off to the side. And so I'm going to keep my razor at a 45-degree angle to the bread. And then I'm just going to put some like wheat, pretty designs on it. They're going to be like 1/8 of an inch thick, whereas the functional score, you want 1/2 inch. So I'm actually going to slice it and then go over it again. And this is just a regular like square razor blade. This is a straight razor for like men's faces, and my husband wasn't using it, so I stole it. Where did you get your new proofing baskets? There is a link. So if you go into the description of the video, which will stay up after I'm done, all the way down at the bottom, I've got my whole list of stuff that I've bought from Amazon over the years. And it says silicone Banneton baskets in there, and it's these exact ones. Hi, Jim. Hi, Jamia. Do you have a tutorial? Yep, Jamia, in the description of the video, it says if you don't have a starter yet, this is for you. So there's like a day-by-day starter tutorial. Also, pinned to the top of the page and the group, there's a common starter questions tutorial as well. I'm really glad, Jim. You made a few nice ones. That's really good. Okay, so let's score this round bowl. So I'm just going to start at the top, decent pressure, and I'm going to come around, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to recut this score again. So now I have a nice, deep, functional score. That's where my ear is going to happen. And then, just for decoration and to make the loaf look pretty, I'm just going to put some, light shallow scores just for, pretty. And then maybe we'll do like a big one here. So all of these are going to let steam escape, right? All of these, and letting steam escape assists with oven spring, but the functional score is essential, right? So our list of essential processes, if you've seen the ebook or if you followed any of our videos or the beginner bread recipe, we believe that there are essential processes, and the essential processes are: take your active starter, mix it with water, add some flour and salt, get it mixed up good, let it rest 30 minutes, stretch and fold, repeat the 30 minutes, and stretch and fold 3 to 4 times. Let your dough bulk proof in a container, dump it out after it's doubled, pre-shape it, shape it, functional score, bake. Everything else is optional. I've been waiting on my starter to pass the float test. I've heard 2 different ways. Do I have to pass that or no? John, Lacey, I'm not sure which one you are, but the float test is not always accurate. If you've stirred your starter and taken all the air out of it, it might not float, even though it's really an active starter. The best way to know if your starter is ready to use is if it's at least a week old, it smells like slightly alcoholic but lovely sourdough, and it's doubling consistently, doing the same thing every day after you feed it somewhere, but it should double within 4 to 12 hours depending on your environment. And I mean, if you're not sure, the best thing is just to try and bake. So with this loaf, what I'm going to do is 3 functional scores across the middle and then do some fun like designs down the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice across the bread on an angle, and then I'll just put some pretty stuff on the inside. So let's see if we can make it so that you can see this as it goes. All right, so let's get 3 functional scores like this. And we want to make sure that they're about a centimeter or half an inch deep. So this loaf, as it cooks, instead of having 1 functional score, is going to go like this, right? And so in between these, I'm just going to put maybe I'll put some X's on this one. I'll just X those, right? And then maybe I'll do X's on this second one over here as well. And then we'll just X those. And then maybe here we'll just do like some V's. So these are for the pretty. Put it over here as well. And then over here. I love seeing all the amazing sourdough art that's out there, all of the cool scoring videos that exist. But before you can get to that, you're really going to need to make sure that your essential processes are down. So let's see. So here's my batard. So it's got functional scores and decorative scores. And then here's my bowl. So same thing, functional score, decorative scores. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pull these Dutch ovens out of the oven and get these into the oven. Perfect, mine's doing that, thank you. Lacey, good. Lacey, that's awesome. So Lacey, now that yours is doing that, you can start doing things like adding cold proofing, starting to play around with changing how you feed your starter to get a different flavor in your bread. You can start using sturdier flours. You can start increasing your hydration, right? Now that you've mastered those essential processes, you can start making it more advanced. So let's grab these Dutch ovens. Whew, goodness gracious. Okay, so 2, and like I said, apartment size oven, these 2 4-quart Dutch ovens fit perfectly. So I'm just going to pop my lids off, and these are really hot. You can maybe see the steam escaping from them. And I'm just going to take my tin foil and sort of drop it into the bottom of the Dutch oven. And then I'm going to use my parchment paper as a sling and get these loaves into the Dutch ovens. Somebody just sent me stars. Thank you so much. That's so great. And just so you know, any little bits of funds that I raise through selling the book or getting Facebook stars or, ads and that sort of thing, I end up just buying more stuff to experiment with. The way it works for me is I'm always in that group troubleshooting and helping people and doing lots of question answering for newbies, and questions still come up that I hadn't even thought of. But what I'll do is I'll like go get whatever they're talking about and experiment with it. Um, Ultimately, so okay, so first of all, I'm just going to thank you. I see those coming in. That's so awesome. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to get these in the oven. And while I'm doing that, I'll actually show you. I don't want to lose too much heat, but here's my tray of water. So it's just sitting on the rack underneath my Dutch oven. And I'll pull that tray out in the last 10 minutes or so just to let the bottom of my loaf get nice and brown. But ultimately, my goal is to have bread that I can cut reasonably easily without it getting too hard on the bottom. So it's 8:38. So 48:58:08. So at 9:08 today, I'm going to take the lid off the Dutch oven, pop them back in, maybe rotate them, and cook them for another 15 to 20 minutes, pull that tray out from underneath, and then let them go 5, 10, 15 minutes, however long they need to go until a thermometer inside comes out at 205. Jim, I have rice flour. I struggle to find rice flour in Canada. It's like the only rice flour that I can ever find is the glutinous kind. So I used to always, like if you watch my beginner bread recipe, I used to always use rice flour as a rule, but I've just been using all-purpose lately. So I've lined the bannetons with all-purpose flour and use all-purpose flour to coat the bread, and it seems to be working fine. Do you have to score, Cameron? If you don't score, and theoretically if your bread is proofed properly, then it's going to explode, right? So the purpose of the score, not explode, not in a bad way. What I'm saying is the way sourdough cooks, right? It starts to build pressure from the hydration inside of it. And then the way it rises is it goes poof, right? So if you don't score, it's going to create its own explosion line. So by cutting that score into your bread, you're controlling how it works, right? So you're creating that nice ear. You're aesthetically making your bread look good. But if you don't score, it'll still be okay. But we do recommend it. Jim, I don't feel like rice flour is necessary. So what I was saying earlier is that, I started out just like everybody else, learning online, Googling, and there's a lot of rules out there, right? There's a lot of things that you hear, like you can't use metal and it can't be bleached flour and it has to be bread flour and you have to use rice flour and whatever it is. And so what I've done is experimented to see if these things are actually true. And while they may be best practices, they aren't rules. So I was using the rice flour. I might even actually have some here in Canada. They sell like Clubhouse. It's a little bag like this, and it's rice flour, and it's by like the same like brand that makes our spices. Um, and I was using it, but I ran out one day and I just experimented with all-purpose flour, and it worked just as well, right? So the idea is that if you have completed the essential processes effectively, then your bread is going to be really forgiving. If it's absorbing flour too much when you're lining your bannetons, then it's probably your hydration is a little off or it's overproofed. Lacey says, can you tell me your oven temp and times? I just got a Dutch oven. I really don't know times and temps. I've looked it up and, well, it was a major fail. So the reality is that as long as you get your bread to an internal temperature of 205 degrees, there's 100 different ways to get there, right? You can open bake on a stone or open bake on a tray, or you can bake in a loaf pan or in a Dutch oven, right? There's no barriers to doing sourdough. What there is a million different ovens. So personally, the max temp that my oven goes to is 450 degrees. So I just keep it at 450 degrees the whole time. I pop the Dutch oven in, I keep the lid on for 30 minutes and then the lid off for 20 minutes. And then after that lid off 20 minutes period, I start checking the temperature of the bread internally with, I'll show you, just like basic meat thermometer that you would like use for your steaks on the barbecue kind of thing. I just stick this in the bread, and if it's only at 185 or 190, then I give it 5 more minutes. If it's at 200 and it's getting close, I give it 3 or 4 more minutes. So in that last 15 minutes of the bread cooking, I'm actually checking it every 5 to 8 minutes with my thermometer. And yeah, so I think, let's see here. See, something funny just happened. There we go. Okay, something funny just happened with my earbuds. I hope you can still hear me. I got these Bose earbuds for Christmas, and they're amazing. It's like they tune everything out. Any tips on how to handle the way more sticky dough when you increase the hydration? I had a hard time shaping it. Yes, I do have tips for you. Don't increase your hydration until you've mastered the essential processes. When you're working with higher hydration, bulk proofing is essential. In the description of this video, there's a bulk proofing success video. You've got to get your bulk proofing right, and you might have to experiment with, is a 30% rise right for me or a 100% rise? But then pre-shaping also becomes very essential with a higher hydration dough. So what pre-shaping is where you dump your dough out of your bulk proofing container. It's a big sticky mess on the counter, and then you're going to use a bench scraper or something with a dull flat side, no flour, no water, and you're going to work some tension into that dough and then let it sit and then shape it. So same thing, description of this video, there is a pre-shaping video. If there's not, I'll make sure I get it into the comments. I'll respond to you there, but that's going to help a lot. Jim, in regards to the rice flour, I've heard that too. I've heard that you have to use a low gluten flour to line your bannetons, and you should use it on top for decoration, but I'm finding that that's just not the case. I've been using the all-purpose flour to line my bannetons for quite some time. Do I need the water pan you have under yours? No, you don't. So actually, well, there's a couple things. If you're open baking, it's good to add steam to your oven. So some people will use a spray bottle and mist. Some people will have a tray of like lava rocks underneath and they pour boiling water onto it. Some people just use a tray of water and wait for it to boil. For an open bake, adding steam is sometimes good, right? For a Dutch oven bake, no, the bread's like completely encased. It's not affecting the bread in any way. The only reason I keep that tray of water in there is to keep the bottom of my bread from overcooking, because the bottom of my oven is hotter than I would like it to be. It's kind of a, let's just say it's like the most inexpensive oven that you can get, and it's not super fantastic. So we put this bread in at 8:38. And it's 8:45 now. So in a minute or two, I'm actually going to pull the bread out and show you how you can do a hot score. So we talked about earlier, if you haven't mastered the essential processes, you're welcome, Lacey. You're welcome. Thanks for saying that. I like it. I actually really have fun doing this. So if your bread is overproofed or not proofed correctly, or something went wrong during the mix, and you go to shape it and it's very sticky and it won't hold its shape, first of all, pre-shaping might help it. You might need to move quickly at this point, but pre-shaping might help it just stand up long enough to start getting some heat on it. But another little trick is if you've put sort of floppy, overproof bread into the oven and it's wanting to fall rather than rise in the oven, you might be able to coax a little bit more rise out of it by doing what we call a hot score. So you'll see things like the 7-minute score out there. Some people don't actually score their bread at all until it's been in the oven for 7 minutes or so. Some people take their bread back out and recut their score. So we're just about at 10 minutes now that my bread has been in. So what I'm going to do is pull it out and sort of show you how it looks right now and show you how to do a hot score. And these are sort of some tips and tricks that you might be able to use. But the reality is, and this is why we teach the essential processes on this page and in the Sourdough for Beginners group as much as we can, is that you have to master the basic essential processes. And they're all really easy, right? They're super easy processes. The problem is that people either get them mixed up and out of order, or start like adding other processes that don't necessarily need to be there, or like not understanding how it's supposed to work. So a really good example is bulk proofing, right? When you leave your dough in your big mixing bowl to do the bulk proofing stage, it might look like it's not rising because sourdough spreads outward and upward. It doesn't do that big puff thing that yeast bread does, right? So when it's in a big bowl, we often see bread get way overproofed in a big bowl because people can't see that it's doubled. And so in our bulk proofing success video, we show how to use like clear, straight-sided containers. Then you can really see what's happening. So let's see here. So Candy from South Africa, relatively new to sourdough, but I love a challenge, not huge here in South Africa sourdough, that is. Thank you so much. You're welcome. I'm really glad you're here. My husband and I were just talking the other day about how we're starting to get a fairly big following in the group from like Australia and New Zealand, and we might need to try and find a mod for that side of the world just so that we're not always sleeping when they're making their posts since we're on opposite times. Okay, so let's try a hot score on this bread, okay? In order to keep as much heat in my oven and prevent heat loss, I'm going to pull both Dutch ovens out at the same time, get my door shut, and then take a look at these. So, and the other thing is, if you do a hot score at 10 minutes, that's also a great time to rotate your Dutch ovens. So they go in facing one way, you want to turn them through if you can, right? So we'll just pop the lids off. Now in this case, this dough was very well proofed, so it's working great. So when you look at this dough, the scores are like deepening. They're doing their job, right? But there is a chance that you open your oven and the scores are flat. They're starting to like just fuse in. It's not going to pop. It's not going to get an ear. And in that case, you would just take your razor and just lightly rescore that functional score. Just let it have a little bit more air, right? This dough doesn't need that right now, but it's a trick that you can use. I see some comments coming in there. I'll come back and read them, but I'm just going to get these back in the oven. So now when I put these back in, I'm going to turn them and switch sides. So this one was over here, so I'm just going to turn this and put it on this side. Turn this and put it on this side. There we go. Okay. So 20 more minutes, and then we'll take the lid off of those. Vivian, take your time and read this testimony, but do not ignore. Yeah, so we're just going to get rid of you, Dan. Bye. North Carolina here, watching and learning. Hey, that's awesome. We had somebody in the live yesterday while we were mixing from, was it Tennessee? It was Louisiana. Anyways, it was somewhere very humid and hot. And then Kim Mecca, one of our mods who lives in Florida, got in and started talking about environment. So a little while back, somebody asked me, well, what temp do I cook my my bread at? And the answer is, and here's another few common questions. Why is my starter taking 8 hours to double when everything I see says it should be 4 hours? How come when I bulk proof my bread, it's doubling within 4 hours when everything I'm seeing says leave it on the counter overnight because it should take 10 to 12 hours? Sourdough is so heavily affected by your environment. And so what you need to do, the fastest way to success with sourdough is to understand what processes need to happen and what the result of each process is, and then watch how it plays out in your environment. So Erin just posted, she's from South Carolina. I think that South Carolina has a fairly hot summer, a cool winter. There's lots of humidity in the summer, not so much in the winter. So she might be someone whose bread is going to rise really fast in the summer and slow way down in the winter. And so with sourdough, as long as you understand what those essential processes are and you're paying attention to your bread and you're willing to be flexible, then you're going to see success. So there's no such thing as a set time. So California here was gifted a 50-year-old starter a week ago. Loving how you break down every step to fully explain it. Learning before I start. Thank you so much. You're welcome, Devin. Be sure to check out the links in the description because they have the beginner bread recipe and the essential processes. Terry Ann says, boy, do I have a lot of questions. Let's see here. I live in Georgia in a 125-year-old cottage. Use gas fire heat and window AC. Horrible time getting a good proof. Yeah, that's a little bit of a tough environment. Concerns about putting two Dutch ovens in the oven at the same time. It almost seems like they would not get it even baked, but I'm certainly willing to try. Interestingly, when I bake two trays of cookies in the oven, I feel like I have to rotate them and increase the time a little. I think the thing about Dutch ovens is that they soak up and then hold heat. If you were watching this video at the beginning, and you can rewind it and it'll be up for replay, when I pull them out, like just steam pours off of them when they're empty. And so I am finding that I'm not having to increase time or change heat at all, whether I'm using one Dutch oven or two. I am finding that two different kinds of Dutch ovens, right? So a cast iron Dutch oven versus an enamel Dutch oven tends to have a little bit of a different. I find the cast iron Dutch oven holds its heat longer when I'm pulling the bread in and out. And so the bread ultimately is cooked quicker. But I'm not necessarily seeing that. And then what was your other thing? Oh, if you're in a big old drafty house, right? In most cases, your dough should be able to bulk proof on the counter. Your starter should be able to double on the counter. You shouldn't need to put it inside your oven with the light on. That scares the life out of me. You know, if you've got a lock or if nobody touches your oven, it's really great. But I've just seen so many cooked starters in the group and people being upset about it. Yesterday, if you watched the live from yesterday where I mixed this dough, I actually dehydrated a bunch of sourdough starter. That's a really good thing for you to do as a backup plan, like an insurance policy. If anything happens, you've got some dehydrated starter, and rather than having to start from scratch because you cooked your starter or it got mold or whatever it is, then you can just rehydrate the starter you have. But if you have a very drafty home, one of our mods, Barb, but manages a mobile home. And so she has like it's cold in her house. There's a few things that you can do, right? One is you can just wait. It'll just take longer if it's a colder environment. Another is that in the Amazon list that's in here, I've got in the description of the video, there's like these kombucha wraps. So it's like this big and it wraps around your jar and closes with Velcro, and you plug it in and it just keeps your jar at a constant temperature, 70 degrees or whatever you want it at. And then there's dough proofing boxes. They're like $25, you know what I mean? They're super inexpensive. I don't know how long they'll last, but I haven't really put one through the ringer yet. But this dough proofing box, you can put your starter or your dough in it, and it just maintains a constant temperature and helps you get that good, consistent bulk proofing. California here was gifted a 50-year-old starter a week ago. We read that one, and then these are the questions. So New Jersey, just started making my sourdough yesterday. Awesome, Debbie. I feel like you probably have a fairly similar climate to me, so just follow along with the beginner bread recipe and the tutorials that we have, and it should probably go fairly similar to how mine did. Oh, I love it. So we get messages sometimes, like as admins and mods in our big group. There's a lot of stuff that we have to sort out. Little disagreements happen, you know, people make weird posts, we have to help them, but every once in a while someone just says that it's working, and that's what keeps us going. Wanda is on day 5 of her starter and it didn't rise late last night. Do you know what I can do? Wanda, that's like number 1 or 2 most common question that we see about a starter. This is normal. It should take at least a week for your starter to activate. Sometimes it can take up to 2 or 3 weeks. It's supposed to be not doing anything right now on day 5. Keep discarding and feeding it. Around day 7, there are some strengthening measures you can take. So for 1 or 2 days, you can increase feeding to twice a day. You can add a little bit of sturdier flour like rye flour or whole wheat or something like that. But on day 5, your starter's doing what it should do. In the description of this video, there's a day-by-day starter video where you can actually see day 1, day 2, day 5, what's happening. So I think you're probably good and should just keep going. Lacey's in Missouri. Where is that close to? I can't remember. We've been through, my husband and I added them all out. We've been through something like 44 of the states. We haven't been to Oregon. Yeah, sort of that upper western coast of the States. And we haven't been way down in the deep south yet. We want to do the Gulf Coast, but we've been almost everywhere. So Sis Bud says, my 7-day old starter has been doubling great. This morning, after feeding last night, it was bubbling a lot. Should I just discard and keep feeding? So technically, Sis, you could grab the beginner bread recipe link in the description of this video and do a mix. If it's a week old and it's been doubling every day, then you could give it a go and try. Usually once we get to 7 days and we start to see that consistent rise and fall, we suggest that you keep discarding and feeding once a day for, another week or so just to get it strengthened up and stabilized. And in that case, you can either put it into a discard jar to use in discard recipes or put it right into bread. And then after 2 weeks, your starter's probably stable enough to start living in the fridge. And those are talked a lot about in the common starter questions tutorial and the day-by-day starter tutorial. Vladia, do you have to cover the basket with a wet towel while proofing? Okay, so there's two kinds of proofing. There's cold proofing and there's bulk proofing. In both circumstances, I don't use a wet towel. So I do bulk proofing, which comes after stretching and folding in clear, straight-sided containers like this with the lid on, right? So once I'm done stretching and folding, I'll get my dough into this container. I'll seal the lid. I'll let it sit beside the stove, and I'll wait for it to double, right? Then once I've pre-shaped and shaped and I move to cold proofing, which is totally different from bulk proofing and what we consider an optional step, then I'll flour the Banneton, get my bread in, and I will keep it covered. So with my oval Banneton, I just use like a bread bag and I just get it on there and tuck it under nice so that there's not too much air getting in there and sit it in the fridge like that. And then with my Boule Banneton, I've got a shower cap, and I just pop it on like this, although it's empty right now, so it's being very wiggly because it's silicone. But I'll just cover it like this and sit it in the fridge for cold proofing overnight. And all we're doing there is just trying to get the bread not to dry out. So I never use a wet towel, but it's important as a beginner to understand the different processes. Bulk proofing and cold proofing are two totally different processes. Bulk proofing is essential. Cold proofing is optional. West Tennessee. Going to jump into the sourdough baking pool soon. Getting a homestead going and working full-time may pose a time concern. Vicki, the way I manage it is I feed my starter before bed. I mix in the morning, so I get up really early. So I don't know if you're homesteading, maybe you have chickens or something. Like before you feed the chickens, just get a quick mix going. Go outside, feed the chickens. It can rest 30 minutes, stretch and fold 30 minutes. So normally I work that mix and stretching folding thing into my morning routine where I have 30 minutes in between to go brush my hair or whatever. And then it can go into the bulk proofing containers and you've got 4 or 5, 6 hours where maybe 8 even where your dough isn't really needing any attention whatsoever other than you just keeping an eye on it. And then the way the beginner bread recipe is set up, you can pre-shape, shape, and then bake theoretically around supper time before or after. I guess I should have mentioned I have a starter that was given to me in 2001 by my best friend's grandmother. Gifted starters are the best starters, I just need to say. Making your own is wonderful, especially with the sense of accomplishment, but these gifted starters, they're established starters, mature over time. So it's been in the family for several generations. I've just recently got into actually using it consistently, and I do dehydrate some, although I have a small bit in my jar in my fridge. With an inch of hooch on it. Yeah, so when you get hooch, it just means it's hungry. You can either pour the hooch off if you don't like a sour taste or stir it in, give it a bunch of flour and some water, and it'll be happy again. If a newbie has a cast iron Dutch, would you recommend using it or open back bread pan first? I noticed the beginner bread recipe is open bake. Is that right? So I did the beginner bread recipe with a loaf pan just because a lot of beginners don't have a Dutch oven yet. If you have a Dutch oven, use one. So about tools, right? You don't need a scale. You don't need a special jar. You don't need a Dutch oven. You don't need a special lane. You don't need a bench scraper, right? There's lots of things that you can do. And I've tried to set up all my beginner bread recipes where you can see me using these things. So for example, if you've seen my pre-shaping video, pre-shaping is normally done with a bench scraper, but I use this, right? It's very dull. It's a lettuce knife that has not been sharpened in a very long time. And I use this in place of a bench scraper. So if you've got a Dutch oven, use it. If you can get a scale, get one. They're like 10 or 12 bucks. Like my one that I have is an Amazon Basics. I've had it forever. It's never failed me. You don't have to use a scale, but it does make it easier. So sorry, just joined. When do I cold ferment? Right after mixing dough, after, oh, great question, Sherry. So again, this comes down to the essential processes. The beginner bread recipe video shows it laid out in order. The sourdough essentials ebook that we wrote really breaks it down. Bulk proofing and cold proofing are two different things. Bulk proofing comes directly after stretching and folding and before pre-shaping and shaping. Cold proofing, which we often recommend you just skip as a beginner until you get the other processes down, comes after shaping. So you've mixed, you've stretched and folded, you've bulk proofed on the counter, you've pre-shaped and shaped your dough. Now it goes into the bannetons and cold proofs overnight in the fridge. I hope that helps. I just discarded and fed it. Good, yay. So theoretically, Wanda, if you're home all day, that thing should double within 4 hours. So you could possibly bake with it this afternoon. Rebecca, I'm from Central Texas. I run a maker bakery, but I still love watching and learning. We can always learn something new. That's so awesome. I'm not sure where Central Texas is, but I've got family in just outside of Dallas, Fort Worth, and my uncle would just love somebody to make him some fresh bread. I don't know if you're close, but if you are, send me a message and I'll connect you too. Kimberly, mine took 12 days to start. Now it's doing great. I haven't made bread yet, but waffles are amazing. Kimberly, maybe I'll reply to your comment. I have this like list of go-to discard recipes. There are a lot of people in the group who never make bread. They just only ever make discard recipes. Yeah, no, you're not giving up, Wanda. You've got this. You can do it. Definitely check out the tutorials. I'm glad you love the tutorials. Thank you so much. Love your programming. Thank you. Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, Kansas, Arkansas. We're smack in the middle of them states. Isn't there a country song about you guys, Lacey, the flyover states? I really like that song. I've driven through them a little bit. I've been through Oklahoma, up into, we have family in Texas and Arizona and Colorado. And a lot of times when we go on our big driving trips to the states, we'll bring the dirt bikes and go to all of them. Does it make a huge difference to add salt after it is rested 30 minutes? Marie, that's actually a really great question. 38, 48, 58. Oh, wait. So I'm almost at 30 minutes now that my bread has been in. So in 3 minutes, I have to take those lids off. Marie, so adding auto leasing, and this is really broken down in the ebook. The adding salt after resting for 30 minutes, optional step. Is it valid? Does it do things? Yes. But as a beginner, when you're still sort of fumbling around, you're probably not getting the benefit of it. I just mix my starter with water, blend it till it's milky, pour my flour on top, dump the salt on top, mix it up, stretch and fold. So could you do that process of adding the flour after you've already, the salt after you've already started stretching and folding? Sure. Do you need to as a beginner? Probably not. Martha, if you don't cool proof, does it go in the oven immediately after shaping from bulk fermenting? Yes. Tom from the Sourdough Journey went live with me a couple of weeks ago. It's somewhere on the page. You should be able to find it, or it's on YouTube. And he gave this piece of advice. If you're only going to bulk proof, if you're not going to cold proof, let your dough double 100%. If you are going to cold proof, then stop your dough in the bulk fermentation process at about 75%. And he's actually got like a specific chart, like if it's this, and 68.5% or whatever it is. But essentially, if you're going to cold proof, stop your dough bulk fermenting at about 75%, get it shaped, get it in the fridge, because it is going to puff up again during cold proofing. what if I want to refrigerate the dough 2 to 3 days to get it more sour? Is that the initial bulk proof of refrigeration that long, or do I bulk proof first and then do first shape and then refrigerate for 2 to 3 days? Great question. And does it have to warm before baking? So Sherry, 2 ways to get more sour flavor in your bread. The first one is use your starter way past peak. So you want to use your starter at or after peak in your bread recipe. If your starter has peaked and started to fall, it's fermenting more. You can use your starter like hours past peak, and the longer past peak, the more sour flavor you're going to get. So that right off the get-go is going to get you more sour flavor. In regards to cold proofing, it comes after shaping. So stretch and fold, bulk proof, pre-shape, shape into the bannetons, then it goes into the fridge to bulk proof. You can leave it in the fridge for days. I think the longest I've ever pushed it is 4 days. I did find that the dough overproofed just a little bit, but you can leave it in there for days. In regards to letting it warm before baking, I don't. It's personal preference. I pull my bread straight out of the fridge, dump it onto the counter, score it, and bake it right away. I sometimes think that having it cold keeps it from starting to spread. If you let it come to room temperature, it's going to continue to proof, which gives it more opportunity to get thin and fall. Linda, that's a really great question. So it's 9:08. I'm just going to pull these Dutch ovens out and get the lids off them, and I'll show you how the bread looks so far. So my tray of water is still on the bottom there. I'll leave it in for another 20 minutes or so. So we're starting to get a nice ear. And this might fog up my phone, I'm not sure. We're starting to get a really nice ear. You can see that the bread is rising. I don't know if you noticed, but when I put it into the Dutch oven, it was quite down low. Now it's nice and high. This is our one with our 3 functional scores. So it's starting to spread nicely. Our little designs look pretty. It's going good. So now I'm just going to pop these back in the oven for another 20 minutes. And like I said last time, I'll rotate them and switch sides. Somebody asked if you needed more time or whatever it may be. I don't think there's anything wrong with rotating your bread through the process if you can. So Linda was asking, I had to leave home abruptly after only a couple hours bulk fermenting. I chucked it in my fridge covered, and it's straight-sided container. So if something comes up during bulk proofing where you have to go, take the whole bulk proof container, stick it in the fridge, leave it there. When you get home, pull it out, stick it on the counter, let it finish bulk proofing. Rather than focusing on temperature, look at where it is. If it's at 100% doubled and it's still a little cold, dump it and pre-shape it, right? But if I had only got so far into the bulk proofing process, just pull it out and let it continue bulk proofing on the counter. Pick up where you left off. That's so sweet. We're about 4 hours from Dallas, but if he's near San Antonio or I'm near Dallas, I'll let you know. That sounds cool, Rebecca. Yeah, I was telling you, Texas is actually something like 17% of our 450,000 members in the sourdough group are from Texas. So, Wanda, how soon can I bake with my starter? If it's doubling consistently every day, go for it. There isn't a date. So a lot of people say, oh, well, after 7 days, you can start using your discard. Well, if your starter's not activated yet, I wouldn't. So I think you should use that as a guide. Flat and sticky dough, not getting a good rise. Usually bake great loaves, but these last 2 have been sad. Something happened during bulk proofing, Megan. If it's flat and sticky, it's almost surely overproofed. And so if you've been doing great loaves, then you probably just made a simple mistake. Maybe you accidentally dumped in too much water. Sometimes with my scale, when I go to tare it, it goes back to like the last measurement that I had rather than 0, and I already start pouring, and then I don't know how much I put in. So just something mistake there. But if you've been getting pretty good loaves, then it was just a mistake, and I would just write it off. Terry, thank you so much. I really appreciate those stars. I promise you I'll buy more flour and stuff for making these tutorials. Martha, my crumb is not quite as light as I would like. Any suggestions? 2 suggestions. If you've mastered the essential processes, increase your hydration slightly. I'll reply to your comment with the medium hydration recipe, but if you haven't mastered the essential processes, perfect your proofing, and that's really going to affect your crumb. Megan, I can't get a good gauge when my bulk proof is done. I've tried all the tricks. Have you tried, Megan, using a container like this and putting your dough in it and using a Sharpie and marking exactly where your dough is and then watching? Um, if you have, then good. If you haven't, try that trick. Otherwise, it's just trial and error. So just keep playing with stopping that bread from proofing between 30 to 100% rise until you get the crumb that you want. Wanda says they look great. I have a big bubble forming during cold proofing. Do I pop it before baking? It's up to you. I mean, if you don't pop it, it's probably just going to get really crispy. So you might as well. It would be more likely that I would sort of massage it in. If you go back to the beginning of this video when I was putting the flour on top of the dough, maybe just massage it in. Watching, thank you. Your ear is beautiful. These ones are coming up. I'll be honest. I'm a little bit, I'm supposed to be teaching, so I definitely wouldn't show you guys dough that wasn't doing well unless I was trying to show. So a lot of my pre-shaping videos are like, hey, look, I overproofed this by accident. I went to my friend's house. I was supposed to drop something off and ended up staying for the football game. So for the purpose of, hey, this is how you fix a mistake. But in most cases, in this scenario, I'm cheating and only showing you my really good dough. Devin, if I fed mine yesterday afternoon and it's still over double the amount this morning, can I bake with it? Sure. Yeah. The longer past when peak happens, the more sour your bread will get, and how sour it is will be affected by how hungry your starter was. But usually when you feed a starter, it doubles and then it falls. If it's still way up high, yeah, use it. Go for it. Let's see. Colleen, using the clear containers are game changers. That's for sure. I don't understand the hydration thing. Could you talk a little bit about that? Yeah, of course. The beginner bread recipe is 120 grams of starter and 680 grams of water. A hydration increase is where you increase the amount of water that you're using, and also starter. So people don't necessarily think, so it's debatable whether or not starter increases hydration, but here's how I see it. When starter eats through its flour, it liquefies, so therefore it's liquid. So our medium hydration recipe goes from 120 grams of starter up to 200 grams of starter, and from 680 grams of water up to 700 grams of water. So it's only 20% or 20 gram increase of water, whereas the flour stays the same. So for hydration, what you're doing is you're using more water as a percentage of flour. Our ebook with the essential processes actually has a whole outline of baker's math. Baker's math is essentially how much as a percentage of the flour you're using is in there. So in more advanced recipes, you might see 1,000 grams of flour, and then all it says is 75% hydration, 20% starter, 5% salt, right? And people are like, what? Adding more hydration to your bread, if you're doing the processes properly, is going to give your bread more spring, a thinner crust, more airy and light inside, right? Because it's less dense. The less water you use, the more dense your bread is. But I don't recommend increasing hydration until you've mastered the processes. Kristen, I've made so many loaves and they're always dense and gummy. I tried monitoring by temp, and then I've tried time. I'm struggling, I think, with the bulk fermentation that's causing it to be dense. I only ever had one decent loaf that wasn't gummy. I need help because I'm so discouraged. So, Kristen, maybe increase your hydration just a little, but definitely focus on fixing that bulk proofing. Go through our beginner bread tutorial, follow sort of those processes exactly, and try to experiment with stopping your bread at different levels of bulk proofing. And practice makes perfect. It just is what it is. So keep practicing. What's good cook time and temp? It varies for everybody. For me, I keep my oven on 450 the whole time, 30 minutes lid on, 20 minutes lid off. And then I keep checking it at the end until it's 205 degrees. Natasha says, what is the percentage protein white flour do you use? So here in Canada, regular all-purpose flour comes in at about 12.5 to 13%. Bread flour is like 13 to 13.5%. So in Canada, we don't have a big difference. I know extensively all about flour proteins, and I'm in some of the advanced groups. I'll say this: beginners can and should start with inexpensive, easy to access flour. You're gonna ruin a lot of loaves. You're gonna go through a lot of stuff, right? And if you don't have the essential processes downtown or down pat, no flour is going to fix that for you, right? You might be starting with hand grown wheat that you made yourself and milling it yourself. But if you're not doing the essential processes properly, you're still going to get a gummy loaf. Are amazing flours able to change your bread? Yep, they are. You can get some really delicious breads using all different kinds of flours. These loaves that are in the oven right now have oat flour in them. These things do matter if you're scientifically trying to create the perfect Instagram loaf. But don't let flours be a barrier to you to start. If all you have is bleached all-purpose flour, use it. It works fine. I have to leave for 4 days. What should I do with my starter? Stick it in the fridge. Maybe feed it before you go. 4 days isn't that long. Just stick it in the fridge, and when you get home, discard it and feed it. I ran out of all-purpose flour. My husband bought self-rising flour. Is that okay to use? Self-rising flour has baking soda or baking powder in it. I'm not sure which one, which kind of goes against what a fermented starter is doing. I wouldn't use it. I don't think it's bad. It might work. I haven't tested it, but if you can, just try and get some regular flour. And Megan is replying to Megan. Thanks, Megan. That actually happened on our live yesterday. People started helping each other. Environments are different. That's what the group's for. Let's see. So, Sherry, how much vital wheat gluten should be added to increase the percent of protein here in the U.S. by 1%? I don't know. I'm sorry, Sherry. I can't open that one up with you. It's not something that I do. Tom from the Sourdough Journey, who we've done some joint lives with, knows about that stuff. Like, he's like the sourdough professor, I think is what he calls himself, and he's really into the deep science stuff. So if that's what you're interested in, wheat proteins and everything else, definitely go to the sourdoughjourney.com, and you'll be able to find all of those answers. But we don't necessarily think that they apply so much to beginners. So 838, 48, 58, 08 are bred 30 minutes. And so 18, so now it's been 10 minutes. So 10 more minutes, and then I'm going to pull the tray of water out from my bread and start checking the temperature and take it out when it's at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. But we covered a lot today. I'm thinking of just getting wrapped up and starting to get ready for my day here. If you've got any more questions, I'll just wait a minute and be happy to answer them for you. You can post them and I'll answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to start getting wrapped up, but I'll just remind you, as always, I missed it. What's the tray of water for? It's just to keep the bottom of my bread soft. So there's two scenarios. If you're open baking or baking in loaf pans, you might want a tray of water in your oven to add some steam to the bread. What a Dutch oven does is create like a pressure cooker, so all of its own steam stays with it, the dough, right? Whereas when you're open baking, the steam starts to escape. So you might put a tray of water in there to add steam to the bread. With me, I just have a tray of water underneath my Dutch ovens to keep the bottom of my bread from getting too hard, because my bottom rack is very hot. Any tricks to create tension when shaping? Do you pre-shape? Yes. Daniela, pre-shaping, I believe, is like way up there. Maybe only second to bulk proofing in importance. I was just showing my crazy knife that I use instead of a bench scraper. I am almost positive that I linked the pre-shaping video in the description of this, but if not, I'll respond to your comment and post it. I definitely dump my dough directly after bulk proofing out onto the counter, no flour, no water, and put a really good pre-shape onto my bread, and then let it sit 30 minutes and then shape it. what kind of type of flour do you use again? Megan, I use whatever's in my cupboard, whatever's on sale. Today and yesterday, I used about 90% regular all-purpose flour and topped up with a little bit of oat flour. I often use spelt. I rarely buy bread here in Canada. The protein content difference between all-purpose and bread flour is not a big thing. But whatever flour you've got in the cupboard is going to work for you. One thing I will say is that whole wheat flours tend to absorb more water and proof faster. So for beginners, I often recommend that you just stay at like a 20% whole wheat flour until you've got the processes down, and then start adjusting. If you temp your bread and it's at 205 but it's not as brown as you would like, does it hurt the bread to cook a little longer? No, I don't think so. I've heard of people going to 200 and I've heard of other people going to 210. I don't think it's going to hurt it. No, that's probably fine. What I do when I cook in loaf pans is I will cook it all the way till the last 5 minutes. I'll take the tray of water out from underneath and I'll actually take the bread out of the loaf pans and sit it just on a cookie tray so that the sides get browned up. So I'll be watching your videos today. So glad I came up on your group. Yay, I'm so glad, Wanda. Well, as you go, like, you can post comments on any of the videos, whether it's on Facebook or on YouTube, and I get a notification by email and I try to answer them as much as I can. Let's see. 9:23 and we said 9:28. So 5 minutes out and then this tray of water comes out and we can test our temperature. So, if you're here and you either joined late or you watched the whole thing, consider trying to understand what the essential processes are. If you watch any of the videos that I've posted on Facebook or YouTube, one way or another, those come up. Consider learning what the essential processes are, what order they come in, how they work, and how they go. So, Yulia, any books you recommend for sourdough? So I wrote an ebook. It's linked at the very top of the description of this video. It's a few bucks on Etsy. It covers the essential processes. It has the beginner bread recipe, the higher hydration recipe. It's got baker's math. It's got a glossary. It's got how to convert from cups to grams. It's got a full photo tutorial. So obviously I recommend my own book, but lots of people like to have like a real like book. And there's a couple, Yulia. So I'll respond to your comment after this video and post a couple of links for the ones that seem to be the most popular here in the group. I can't remember them right off the top of my head, but there's a few good ones. So for actual books. Okay, so learn the essential processes. Practice with the beginner bread recipe. So what's special about the beginner bread recipe? The beginner bread recipe, first of all, is a low hydration recipe. It's 68% hydration. Low hydration but lowers the risk of sticky dough, right? And the biggest complaint we see with people trying to master sourdough is I got to this point and my dough was so sticky I couldn't manage it anymore, right? So we always recommend that beginners start with a low hydration recipe. And then the beginner recipe also only has the essential processes. Any optional or advanced processes are omitted because we recommend just practicing doing those processes until you get it down. So definitely check out the beginner bread recipe. If, yes, Lara Kathy, everything is very simple if you understand the order of operations. What happens is people get mixed up and confused, and that's what we're trying to do is simplify. Aloha. Aloha from Maui. I'm jealous. Oh my gosh, we have so much snow. It's so cold here. I wish I was there. I bake my bread using the cover of the Dutch and place the larger part over it. Is that okay? Sure. If it's working for you, then that's great. If using rye, would I just put the 150 grams in place of wheat, or would rye be different for some reason? Nope. Use any combination of flour you want. If you're a beginner, I recommend you keep it around 150 to 200 grams with a sturdier flour like rye. Rye is going to absorb more water and rise quicker, so you'll just really need to keep an eye on it. Does low hydration mean the finished bread will be drier? Devin, not drier, denser. So a lot of people start working with the beginner bread recipe and they're like, okay, I'm sure. I'm doing everything right. You know what I mean? It's not gummy, but it's heavier and denser than I would like it to be. I call it the monster mash. So once you've perfected sourdough, you'll have this nice big tall loaf and you'll be able to squish it and it'll pop back, right? You'll need hydration to create that. How does the hydration affect the crumb? So the hydration will provide a denser, heavier crumb. So as you increase hydration, you'll start to get a fluffier, lighter, airier crumb. So you absolutely should increase hydration after practicing with the beginner recipe at some point. And I'll make sure that there's a medium hydration recipe in there. So 9:27, we're pretty close to 20 minutes. So let's just take a look at this bread and see how it's looking now. And then I'll just pull this tray of water out. So here's my tray. Let's just shut this oven for 1 minute. So it's just like an old, like, cake tray. I'll just dump it out. And with my Dutch oven, like I said, the only purpose of this is to keep the bottom of my bread from getting too hard. But I use this when I cook sourdough with loaf pans in order to add steam. So you can see that the water gets to boiling and adds extra steam to the bread. So let's see how these are doing. They're coming along nicely. Good fresh bread. So now I've done 30 minutes lid on, 20 minutes lid off. Here we go. Colleen, that's a great question about inclusions. I'll answer it for you in 1 second. It's a really good question. So here we go. Beautiful ear. Really coming along. Still very white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop these in for about 5 minutes. Now the tray of water is gone, so it'll just sort of, crisp up the bottom of the bread. And then in 5 minutes, I'll check the temp, and then I'll know what I need to do from there. Inclusions. You can put inclusions in during stretching and folding, or you can put inclusions in during final shaping. I have a video where I put the inclusions in during final shaping, and I also did jalapenos live a few days ago during stretching and folding. I did find that putting the jalapenos in during stretching and folding absolutely increased the hydration of my bread. It proved faster. It was much more wet. I suggest if you're going to do conclusions as a beginner to put it in at the time of shaping. Bye, Martha. Thank you so much. I'm really glad you're here. Yeah. Okay. Well, we managed to stay on. There's so many of you here. This was so fun, and I love answering all of these videos, and I appreciate all of you guys so much. I like making sourdough, and I like teaching, and I'm already going to be here anyway. So what recipe did I use today? So Colleen, if you just go down a little bit on the page after this, you'll see yesterday I mixed this bread up. So it was the medium hydration bread recipe. So I used 700 grams of water, 200 grams of starter. I had a little bit of oat flour left. If I remember correctly, it was about 175 grams of oat flour. And then I topped up to 1,000 with all-purpose flour. So what would that be? Like 825 grams of regular all-purpose flour and 20 grams of salt. I came in late but have one question. I'm afraid to overwork the dough when I'm shaping. Should I be? Yeah, you know what, LaDonna, by the time you get to shaping, you want to kind of be a little bit gentle. Like you want to, stretching and folding, you're building strength, and you want to sort of work the dough lots. But by the time you get to shaping, what you're trying to do is trap air inside of the bread. So watch the pre-shaping video. I actually show what you're trying to do is get air to stay inside the bread, right? And then once you get the bread into the oven, the combination of the hydration that's in the bread and the air that's in there create that spring. So you definitely want to be gentle and not push all of the bubbles out of your bread when you're shaping. That's a really good question. Let's see. Good. All right. So we're almost there with my bread. So I'll just show you. Oh, and then let's talk about cooling your bread since we only have a couple of minutes left before this bread comes out. And you might as well see it when it's done. So I just let my bread cool on these racks. So I had a couple of loaves the other day. What percentage of discard used with flour? I'm not sure what kind of recipe you mean. It definitely varies for different recipes. In this case, this one was 20% starter to flour, 200 grams of starter to 1,000 grams of flour. The beginner bread recipe is 12% starter at 120 grams of starter. So the other day I had a couple of loaves that weren't my best. They had overproofed. I had forgotten about them. Just for bread, yeah. So for the beginner bread recipe, start with 120 grams of starter. And for the higher hydration, start with 200 grams of starter. So anyhow, I took these two overproof loaves and I cut into one while it was hot and I posted a video. Oh my gosh, it was like awful. It like while I was trying to cook it, it was squishing. It was steam was coming out everywhere and it got so gummy. And then even after it cooled, that one that had been cut was never as good. So I didn't cut one and cut the other. The one that I didn't cut, even though it was overproofed, because I let it cool fully, ended up just being a better bread. So I definitely recommend cooling your bread as fully as you can, and definitely don't put it in anything like a bag or a bread box or anything like that until it's like totally and fully cooled, because the bread just keeps letting steam out for a really long time after it's done cooking. So let's just check the temperature on these breads that are in the oven right now and see what we're at. So I don't like to have a big ugly hole in my bread, so I usually just take my thermometer and stick it in underneath the ear. And right now, and my thermometer is kind of cheap and it takes a second, but right off the bat, as soon as I stick the thermometer in, it's only coming up at like 165. So if your bread is gummy and you're sure that you bulk proofed properly and you're using a medium hydration recipe, but it's still gummy, it could be that you're overcooking it. So for example, this bread has been in the oven for 55 minutes now, right? And you can read 1,000 different ways to cook bread. And if you follow time with sourdough, you're setting yourself up for failure. So I'm getting 170 degrees here. I want 205. When you look at this bread, I mean, it might look done, right? And so it's been in the oven for 55 minutes. It looks like it's done. It would be totally and completely reasonable to pull that bread out of the oven and let it start cooling. But if you look, the bread's still really gummy and wet inside on my thermometer, and it only was at 170 degrees. So if you can dig out, your steak thermometer or the thermometer that you're using for your meats or whatever, or grab one of these. I think there's one in the Amazon list in the description of this video for, I don't know, $7 or $8 or $12, whatever it is. If you can get one of these, that's going to get you closer to perfect bread every time too. All right, guys. Well, you've seen the process. We're just about there. I wouldn't mind staying on just to show you the bread once it comes out. But what I'll do is once I get the bread out and get it onto the racks, I'll post a picture in the comments. If you're watching this as a replay later, any questions that you have, just post them in the comments. Definitely check all of the links. And in a little bit here, I'll actually go through and look at all the comments that came in and try to answer them for you. For you guys who sent me stars, thank you so much. That's just yay, that's fun, and I really am appreciative of that support. Jim, you're welcome. I've been seeing you in the group for a little while here. I know you're really trying hard. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad it's going well for you. And I'm positive that you're just going to be posting awesome pictures of bread soon. So I think that's it for today. But again, my name's Sarah. I'm from Sourdough for Beginners. I love teaching. So make sure you follow the page, and hopefully you'll get notifications and come see me soon. Bye.